Chapter 67. Aisha. Aisha saw Omar's reflection first. He was smiling, the smirk he wore when he was flaunting a victory. It had never bothered Aisha before, but seeing it plastered on his face now, as he dragged Prince Mazin behind him, made her bristle. Omar walked past without sparing her a glance. Mazin, however, lifted his gaze. The Sultan's youngest son looked as if he'd been in a fight. There was a smear of blood on his swollen jaw, and he was holding his arm at an awkward angle, as if he were in pain. Aisha forced herself to look stoically back at him, even as his expression crumbled and her heart fell. She turned her attention to the lamp Omar was holding in his other hand. The object didn't speak to her like relics did, and yet she had the distinct impression it was alive. Alive and unhappy. Omar stopped before the merchant. "Midnight merchant," he said. Luli glared. "I see you've added patricide to your list of accomplishments. You never were good at greetings, were you?" He gestured toward Tawil, who lowered his bow and went to stand behind Mazin. Then he glanced up at Aisha and made a flicking motion toward the merchant. "It commands you like a dog," the resurrectionist observed. Aisha wordlessly stepped away from Kadir and grabbed the merchant. The jinn looked up in alarm as she dragged Luli away. Aisha managed to pull her back a couple feet before the merchant broke free of her grasp, whipping around and grazing her with the knife. Aisha stepped back. She glimpsed the red beading on her skin and exhaled shakily. It didn't matter that she had been brought back by an Ifrit. She was still human, still herself, and she would not let a conniving Ifrit manipulate her. The resurrectionist sighed. "The only one you are fooling is yourself, human." Aisha scowled at the pity in the Ifrit's voice. She forced herself to focus on Omar, who was lowering himself into a couch before the merchant. "I hope you were just as pleasant with Imad," he said conversationally, "which, speaking of, I must thank you for dealing with him. By the time I realized he was a threat, you'd made him into a corpse." Had the merchant been a jinn, Aisha suspected her glower would have set Omar on fire. "Is that what you do to thieves who get caught? You kill them to destroy evidence of the murders you had them commit." Omar's smile fell. "Ah, I'm afraid in that regard I take after my dearly departed father." He stepped away from them. "Where jinn are involved, there are always casualties," he used to say. The king's relics were a closely guarded royal secret. It would not do to leave behind survivors. Aisha clasped her hands behind her back, breathed out slowly. This story had never bothered her before, so why did it unsettle her now? "Because you realize the dead do speak," the resurrectionist said, "that even when they are gone, they speak through the loved ones they leave behind." Aisha stared at the merchant, at the mournful slouch of her shoulders and the anger burning in her eyes. "So you killed my tribe because it was inconvenient to let them live?" A shadow passed over Omar's face as he looked at her. "Not all of us are lucky enough to die martyrs. For most, death is only ever happenstance. You think you are special, Al-Nazari, that your tribe was special? You are all only human, weak, fallible, and mortal." His eyes flashed. Ahmed believed himself to be invincible too. That conviction was his downfall. The merchant stiffened, her face going dangerously blank. "What did you do to Ahmed?" The Wali was too curious for his own good. He thought to sneak around my palace and unravel my plans. "He came close," he sighed, "but even hunters can be cut down." Aisha, trapped in her own mind, did not see the merchant shift until it was too late. Luli lunged toward Omar, her dagger burning bright with fire as she thrust it forward, and stabbed the prince in the shoulder. Aisha was too shocked to move. Fire licked at her king's clothes and face as he stared at the blade impaled at his shoulder, and then he smiled and disappeared. "A relic?" Aisha thought at the same time the queen said, "His earring. It is Ifrit magic." The merchant fell, still clutching the dagger she had driven into Omar's shoulder. Aisha whirled at the sound of Omar's voice, which was coming from her right. "Tell me, bodyguard, are you the Jinn King I sent my thieves to find all those years ago?" The prince stood in front of Kadir, completely unharmed. Aisha stared, uncomprehending. Kadir did not respond with words. His eyes flashed red as he cut a hand through the air and set the prince on fire. This time Aisha saw Omar ripple like water before he disappeared. She startled when he appeared right beside her. "No matter," he smiled. "My thieves may have failed me then, but I will have the relic now." In a single motion he pulled a dagger from his sleeve and ran it across his palm, drawing black blood. A memory sparked in her mind of black blood oozing from Prince Mazin's wound. He had been in Omar's body then. Aisha had assumed it was a side effect of the relic, but there was no bangle on Omar's arm when he pressed his bloodied hand to the lamp. There was a beat of silence, followed by a rush of intense heat. Aisha braced her feet as a dense smoke burst from the lamp and swept across the area. She could barely see, could barely breathe, but she could hear Omar's voice beneath the crackling storm. "Jinn King," he yelled, "you are bound to me and you will serve me." All at once the smoke withdrew. Aisha gasped air in through her lungs as she looked up. The creature standing beside Omar was a silhouette of smoke, features undefined except for its eyes, which were turquoise blue that glittered like diamonds. Its body was made up of undulating storm clouds, and the fire pulsing beneath its skin flashed like lightning. Aisha dared a glance at the others. The merchant and the prince both looked spellbound, staring at the Ifrit with their mouths hanging open. Tawil was in a similar state of shock. "The shapeshifter," he murmured. The title made Aisha's skin prickle. She recognized it. Omar turned to Kadir, who had risen to his feet and was pulling Tawil's arrows from his skin. Silver blood gushed from his wounds as they began to heal. "Ouija," he said softly. "Ouija." The resurrectionist's voice was a sad echo, her grief a hole in Aisha's heart. The mass of smoke shuddered at the name. "Jinn of the lamp," Omar said, "I command you to kill the Jinn King before me." Without preamble, the creature of smoke pounced, transforming into a panther that knocked Kadir to the ground. Kadir grabbed the panther's jaws as it lunged for his throat, but his hands were quivering, his face blanched with terror. The merchant stumbled to her feet and rushed toward him. Unthinkingly, Aisha gave chase. It was easier to act than to think, easier to follow the plan than to question it. The resurrectionist's voice brushed through her empty mind. "And here I thought you had returned to life to carve your own path." "My path, not yours," she snapped. She gained on the merchant until she was close enough to tackle her from behind. She pressed the sword to her throat. Luli struggled, but to no avail. Together they watched Kadir battle the Ifrit. When he conjured a wall of flame, the Ifrit pushed past it in the form of a great flaming bird and rushed at his face with its talons, shrieking as Kadir held out a hand and threw a gust of wind at it. "Give it up, merchant," she heard Tawil's voice behind her. "Sit back and enjoy the show. The shapeshifter is sure to give us a good one." Shapeshifter. There was that title again. It had been in Kadir's story about the 7 Ifrit, the Jinn version. She shuddered as Tawil approached. She remembered his nervous laughter when she touched his burning skin, the way he had shrunk away from her when she gripped his arm. "Finally," the resurrectionist said, "you see clearly." Tawil approached. He stepped closer, dragging Mazin behind him. Closer, closer. Aisha's surprise flared into indignation. She whirled, pulling her sword away from the merchant's throat and slashing it at Tawil. Tawil gasped and grabbed the wound on his arm, but not quickly enough to conceal the silver blood oozing through his fingers. Aisha gripped the hilt of her sword. "I knew it." Tawil paled. "I can explain." But she didn't need an explanation, not when the realization had already dawned on her. Without flinching, she grabbed a knife from her belt and stabbed Tawil in the throat. Silver gushed from his lips as he crumpled to the ground. He deserved that. The Ifrit's pleasure was an undercurrent to Aisha's own anger. Mazin sidestepped the thief's body, face ashen. The merchant's wide eyes flicked between her and the corpse. There was a tense pause as they watched Tawil bleed out. Then they all faced Omar, who had not moved. Aisha glared at him. "I was going to tell you after this was all over," he said, voice eerily calm. after he'd finished using you, the resurrectionist said. Aisha glanced at the silver blood pooling on the ground. She thought of the recollection in Junaid's eyes when she had brought up the caller's existence to him. The strange injury on Samar's arm healed far too soon. How many of us are jinn? Omar regarded her stoically. More than half. She was baffled. She'd become one of the 40 thieves to kill jinn. How was it that so many of her comrades were jinn? That they were killing other jinn? Omar approached. The jinn who flee into the human lands are criminals in their world. Is it so strange I would work with jinn who want to exterminate them? Our goals align. He paused, dared a smile. You are important, Aisha. I did not make a deal with you. I chose you. I chose you. How long had she clung to those words, believing them to be the truth? She had always believed the reason Omar recruited her was because he'd seen a kindred spirit in her. She had never considered him a friend, but she had trusted him, and he'd used that trust against her. He had used her, even knowing her hatred of jinn. Omar ventured a step closer. Aisha responded by throwing a dagger at his face. She was irritated when it went right through him. An illusion? Mazin murmured. Ifrit magic, Aisha said. She had always thought Omar's stealth was unnatural, but had never questioned it. But now she could not stop looking at the earring, at the relic on his ear that made that stealth possible. How many other illusions had he crafted with that magic? In all the years they hunted together, Aisha had never seen him bleed black blood. Had even that been a trick? An elaborate deception created by his mother's earring? The last piece of the puzzle slid into place. Let us show them the truth, the resurrectionist said. Aisha set her hands on Mazin and Luli's shoulders. Look, she said, and the cursed magic running through her veins enveloped all their senses, allowing them to see the phantom behind Omar. The similarities between them were striking. They had the same shaped face, the same thin nose. The merchant inhaled sharply. An ifrit? The resurrectionist spoke through Aisha. Here you know her as the Sultan's first wife. But in our world she is a powerful illusionist. In our world she is an ifrit, Aliyah the mystic. Once Aliyah might have been Aisha's target, but Aisha did not seek out the dead. She had never believed in chasing the past, but the present. There lay a vengeance she could claim with her blade. The Ifrit's voice brushed through her mind, and with my magic, if you choose to wield it. Aisha could feel that magic beating in sync with her heart. So far, it had remained an extra, unwanted sense, a way for her to hear and speak to the dead. But now it was being proffered to her as a weapon. She hesitated. Magic had destroyed her life, but perhaps when sharpened into a weapon of her making, magic could help her reclaim the control of it. Aisha nodded mutely. Together, then. She could hear the triumphant grin in the Ifrit's words as her power scorched through Aisha's veins. The heat of it was exhilarating, overwhelming. Aisha breathed in deeply to relax her thudding heart and trembling limbs. She thought of Samar, who had promised to sing her praises when she returned to Medine, and Junaid, who had proposed a toast to her loyalty. What a shame that she would have to disappoint them both. Aisha looked at Omar and made a new vow. I promise I will kill you, she thought. She always kept her promises.